The silence was the first thing to break through. Not a peaceful quiet, but a profound, unholy stillness that felt heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a world holding its breath after a scream. Dr. Eris Thorne tasted dust and copper. Her world returned not in a rush, but in fragments. The drip, drip, drip of water somewhere nearby. The low groan of wood under a strain it was never meant to bear. The faint whistle of wind through a space that had, 12 minutes ago, been a wall. She was under her kitchen table. The old, sturdy oak piece her grandmother had insisted she take had likely saved her life. Pushing herself up, a universe of aches bloomed across her back and shoulders. A clinical part of her brain, the part that never slept, began a methodical self-assessment. Laceration on the forehead, minor. Possible concussion, monitor for dizziness. Contusions, multiple. No obvious fractures. She was alive. Her eyes adjusted to the pale, bruised light of the Oklahoma dawn, and she saw that the word home no longer applied to the space she occupied. 3 of the 4 walls were gone. The roof was a jagged maw open to the weeping gray sky. The life she had carefully rebuilt here in Havenwood, the worn armchair where she read medical journals, the shelf of mismatched photo frames, the simple vase she kept filled with wildflowers was now a field of debris, a chaotic collage of splinters and sorrow. Her gaze fell on a piece of a frame, the glass shattered but the image beneath it miraculously intact. A photo of her and Mark, his arm around her, his smile so effortlessly brilliant it hurt to look at. He was wearing his city surgeon's suit. She was wearing the weary look of a resident. It was from another lifetime. She carefully extricated the photo from the wreckage, tucked it into the pocket of her jacket, and stood up. Morning would have to wait. Her body was intact, but her purpose was out there. Her eyes scanned the horizon, past the unrecognizable ruin of her personal life, to the one structure that mattered more. 200 yards away, across a landscape of devastation that looked like a giant had chewed up the neighborhood and spat it out, stood the Havenwood Community Clinic. It was battered, bruised, and violated. The proud sign that read, Havenwood Community Clinic, Dr. Eris Thorne, M.D., was hanging by a single bolt, swinging in the mournful breeze. The front windows were blown out, leaving gaping, black eyes. A huge section of the roof was peeled back like the lid of a tin can, but it was standing. The brick walls, the foundation of her new life, her sanctuary, her penance it had held. A flicker of something fierce and protective ignited in her chest, a fire that burned away the shock. Her personal loss was an amputation she would deal with later. Her mission was right there, wounded but alive. She began to walk, her boots crunching on glass and shattered wood. The path from her home to her clinic, a walk she'd made 1,000 times with a cup of coffee in hand, was now a treacherous obstacle course. A neighbor's sedan was upside down. The proud oak tree that had shaded the street for a century was a jagged stump. The air was thick with the smell of rain, wet earth, and freshly split pine. The silence was now being pierced by the first sirens, their distant wails a thin blanket over the emerging cries of the wounded and the lost. She reached the clinic's entrance. The solid oak door she'd chosen for its welcoming feel was gone, simply vanished. She stepped over the threshold into the waiting room. It was a war zone. Chairs were overturned, patient files scattered and soaked, a child's drawing of a smiling sun ripped from the wall and smeared with mud. It felt like a personal violation, but as she pushed deeper into the examination rooms, hope sparked again. The inner walls had held. The heavy equipment was likely damaged beyond repair, but the rooms themselves were sound. The heart of the clinic was still beating. In exam room 2, she found her primary medical bag, a heavy-duty leather satchel, tucked safely under the steel desk where she'd left it. She pulled it out, the familiar weight in her hand, a grounding force in a world that had come unmoored. She clutched it to her chest, a knight taking up her sword. Looking at the destruction, at the single, ripped drawing of the sun, she made a silent, ferocious vow. She would not grieve. She would not despair. She would work. She would get this clinic, her clinic, open again. The people of Havenwood would need it now more than ever. The tornado had been an act of God, a blind, senseless fury. Her response would be an act of will. As she began to methodically sort through the salvageable supplies, a voice, thin and reedy, cut through the air. Doctor Thorne? Eris emerged from the clinic's broken doorway to see Maria, a woman in her late 70s whose smile was usually the brightest thing in her waiting room. Today, her face was a mask of terror, her dress torn and stained with mud. "It's Luis," she cried, her voice cracking. "He's hurt." The porch collapsed. Eris followed Maria's frantic gestures to the flattened remains of their small home. There, pinned under a heavy beam, was Luis, his face pale and clammy, a deep, angry gash on his lower leg bleeding sluggishly. He was a diabetic, and Eris's mind immediately began running through the cascade of potential complications. "It's okay, Maria. I'm here," Eris said, her voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone she used during emergencies. It was a shield for her, and a comfort for them. She immediately took charge, instructing a dazed-looking neighbor how to use a crowbar to create leverage. Once Luis's leg was free, her hands were a blur of efficiency. She cut away the trouser leg, her expression grim. The wound was deep, contaminated with dirt and splinters. Sepsis was a real and immediate threat. Using gauze and antiseptic from her bag, she cleaned and dressed the wound with practiced precision. She knew his medical history by heart, the type of insulin he used, his allergies, the heart condition he'd been managing for a decade. These weren't just chart numbers. They were the details of a man's life. Just as she finished applying a pressure bandage, an ambulance crew, their faces etched with exhaustion, arrived. They were two men running on fumes, their uniforms stained, their eyes holding the 1,000-yard stare of those who had seen too much in too little time. "We've got to take him," the lead EMT said, his voice flat. "We're setting up a triage center at the high school gym." "He's a type 1 diabetic, his leg is compromised, and he's showing signs of shock," Eris countered, not looking up from monitoring Luis's pulse. "He needs observation in sterile conditions, not a cot in a gymnasium." "Doc, we've got dozens of critical injuries and 3 working ambulances," the EMT said, a hint of desperation in his voice. "The hospital in Claremore is already overwhelmed. The gym is the best we can do. It's every man for himself right now." The phrase, meant to convey their desperation, struck Eris as the perfect, awful summary of the unfolding disaster. She looked at Maria's terrified face, then at the barely standing clinic behind her. "No," she said, the single word ringing with finality. "He's staying with me. I'll look after him." She promised Maria she could get the emergency fridge in the clinic running, where she kept a backup supply of insulin. The EMTs, too tired to argue with her iron-willed certainty, simply nodded, gave her a spare trauma kit, and moved on to the next collapsed house. As she worked to clear a space in exam room 2, the smell of antiseptic and her own focused labor triggered a memory, sharp and unwelcome. She saw herself standing in a gleaming, sterile ballroom in a downtown Tulsa hotel, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand. It was a hospital fundraiser. Mark, her husband, was across the room, laughing with a group of hospital administrators, his charisma a magnetic force. He'd caught her eye and drifted over, his smile brilliant. "This is how you build a career, Ari," he'd murmured, squeezing her hand. "You have to play the game." "I just want to heal people, Mark, not network for a new oncology wing," she had replied, the words feeling hollow even then. The memory dissolved into a harsher one. The fluorescent lights of that same hospital's emergency room, the air cold and impersonal, a young doctor with terrified eyes telling her there had been a car accident. Mark was gone. The state-of-the-art facility, the institution they had dedicated their lives to, had offered no comfort, only cold protocol and platitudes. Weeks later, driving aimlessly through the Oklahoma countryside, she had seen it. A small, neglected brick building with a faded for sale sign half hidden in the overgrown weeds. It was there, in that moment, that the idea for the Havenwood Community Clinic was born. A place where medicine would be personal. A place where she could be a pillar, not a cog. A place to heal herself by healing others. The low hum of the portable generator she'd found in a storage closet brought her back to the present. The small clinic fridge was on, its light a beacon in the gloom. The insulin was safe. Luis was stabilized on a cot. She had a purpose. Now, she needed resources. She pulled out her satellite phone and made the first official call, the one to the insurance company. She was greeted by an automated message, followed by 20 minutes of tinny, infuriating hold music. Finally, a man's voice, smooth and detached, came on the line. "Sterling Cross Insurance, this is Carl speaking. How can I assist you?" Eris explained the situation concisely. A confirmed F4 tornado had leveled the town. Her clinic was severely damaged but salvageable. and she needed to know the process for filing a claim and getting an advance for emergency repairs. Carl made a series of sympathetic-sounding noises. "Oh my, that sounds just awful. I'm so sorry to hear that. Let me just pull up your policy." More clicking. More silence. "Okay, doctor. Thorne, I have your policy here. Now, for a claim of this nature, you'll need to fill out Form 7B-4, the Natural Disaster Damage Assessment Form. Once that's submitted, a preliminary damage assessment team will be dispatched in, let's see," he hummed, "pending road accessibility and personnel allocation, approximately 10 to 14 business days." 14 days? Eris exclaimed, her voice rising. "Carl, there are injured people here now. I need to make this building safe now." "I certainly understand your frustration, ma'am," Carl said, his tone unwavering, "but we have to follow the process. Furthermore, I should advise you that your policy contains a standard Act of God clause, which may impact the final payout amount for damages resulting from atmospheric events. It will all be determined by the adjuster's final report." "So you're telling me you can't do anything?" "What I'm telling you," Carl said, his voice losing its thin veneer of politeness, "is that we are experiencing a high call volume due to the event. Once you find a way to submit the form, you'll be placed in the queue. Have a nice day." The line went dead. Eris stared at the phone in her hand, her knuckles white. The tornado had destroyed her world in minutes, with blind, thoughtless power. But this cold, deliberate, bureaucratic indifference felt infinitely more destructive. This was the wall she now had to face, and it was made not of wind and rain, but of rules and men. And it was just the beginning. The next morning, the town began to crawl with a new kind of life. Not the dazed survivors, but the political animals who smelled opportunity in the wreckage. At the head of the pack was Mayor Richard Sterling. He arrived with a small entourage and, more importantly, a local news camera. Eris watched him from the broken door of her clinic as he moved through the debris, a master of performative grief. He shook a hand here, clasped a shoulder there, his face a carefully constructed mask of solemn concern. He finally made his way to her, his polished shoes navigating the rubble with distaste. Eris was trying to pry a warped window frame from the wall of the waiting room, sweat and grime streaking her face. "Eris, terrible business. Just terrible," he said, his voice booming for the benefit of the camera 30 feet away. "But rest assured we'll get through this. Havenwood is strong. We have a comprehensive recovery plan. The town council is meeting this afternoon to declare a state of emergency." "I don't need a declaration, Richard. I need a permit," Eris said, cutting through the bluster. "An emergency authorization to begin repairs. I have people who need care now. Luis is stable, but I can't keep him in these conditions for long." The mayor's smile became a thin, tight line. His eyes, unlike his mouth, did not smile. They were cold and calculating, flicking over the damaged clinic with the gaze of an investor, not a neighbor. "Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he stepped closer, momentarily blocking the camera's view. "All reconstruction has to be coordinated. We can't have a free-for-all. This is a chance to rebuild the new Havenwood. Bigger, better. This clinic is all the better some people have," Eris shot back. The mayor's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of irritation. "Look, I've already been in talks with OmniHealth," he said, the name dropping like a stone into the conversation. "They're a major healthcare provider. They're very interested in helping us rebuild. A real, state-of-the-art facility. They're willing to make a significant investment in our town." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Sterling didn't see a damaged clinic. He saw a prime piece of real estate. Her small, independent practice was an obstacle to his lucrative pre-arranged deal. He wanted her gone. "So, no permit," Eris stated flatly. "It's not a no," Sterling corrected, his public smile returning as he stepped back into the camera's line of sight. "It's a, not yet. Everything has to go through the proper channels for safety and planning. We appreciate your initiative, Doctor. But please, leave the rebuilding to the professionals. We'll take care of you." The veiled threat hung in the air, as foul as the smell of stagnant water. He gave her a final, patronizing pat on the arm and moved on, his performance continuing for the next grieving family. Furious, Eris decided that the proper channels were a dead end. If she was going to fix her clinic, she would have to do it herself. She went to the ruins of her home, a place of profound personal pain, and began to salvage. She found usable 2x4s from what was once her bedroom wall, sheets of plywood from the floor. It was a heartbreaking, back-breaking task, using the fragments of her shattered personal life to mend her professional one. She had managed to haul a small pile of lumber to the clinic when a familiar truck pulled up, blocking her path. Sheriff Brody climbed out, his large frame moving with a heavy reluctance. He wasn't a bad man. Eris had treated his daughter's asthma for years, but he was a man who followed orders, and his orders came from the mayor. "Eris, I can't let you do this," he said, his voice low, avoiding her gaze. "Can't let me do what, Brody? Board up a window?" she asked, her voice dripping with incredulity. "The mayor's declared a moratorium on all unauthorized construction," he recited, as if reading from a script. "It's a public safety issue until the structural engineers can assess every building." "A safety issue?" Eris felt a hot surge of anger. She gestured wildly at the devastation around them. "Look around! People are hurt! There's no power, no clean water. The biggest safety issue in this town right now is the lack of a functioning medical clinic. Are you seriously going to stand there and stop me from trying to help people?" Brody had the decency to look ashamed. He shifted his weight, his eyes fixed on a point over her shoulder. "My hands are tied. It's an official town ordinance now. I'm just doing my job. Please, Eris, don't make this difficult for me." "Difficult for you?" she whispered, the question full of venom. He didn't answer. He simply stood there, a human roadblock, the physical manifestation of a corrupt system grinding its gears. He waited until she dropped the piece of plywood she was holding, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Only then did he nod grimly and drive away, leaving Eris alone in a silence that felt more oppressive than ever. She was being actively, officially thwarted by the very people sworn to protect her community. The rage in her chest was a cold, hard knot. Her next stop was the last resort, Miller's Hardware. The store was one of the few commercial buildings still standing, running on a massive generator. Its owner, Big Dave Miller, a gruff man with a heart that was usually in the right place, was rationing supplies to the townsfolk. Eris walked in, the little bell over the door tinkling mockingly. She handed Dave a short list: a heavy-duty tarp, roofing nails, a can of sealant. Dave read the list and his face fell. "Heard the mayor put a stop work order on you, Doc," he said, not meeting her eyes as he wiped down the counter with a rag. The fear was palpable. In a town this small, the mayor's power was nearly absolute. He controlled business licenses, cleanup contracts, the flow of information. Crossing him was economic suicide. "Dave, Luis is in my clinic," Eris said, her voice quiet but intense, foregoing any argument about her rights. "His leg is getting worse. I just need to keep that one room clean and dry. That's all." Dave wrestled with himself for a long moment, his gaze flickering from Eris's determined face to the street outside, as if expecting the mayor himself to appear. The entire town was holding its breath, afraid to move. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "Look," he muttered, moving towards the back of the store. "I can't sell you a truckload, it'd be too obvious. But, take this." He emerged with a thick, rolled-up tarp and 3 boxes of nails. "Go on, it's on the house, off the books. Don't you tell a soul where you got it?" It was a small act of rebellion, a crack in the dam of fear, but it felt monumental. She thanked him, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. That night, under the cold light of a partial moon, Eris worked. She scrambled onto the low roof of the clinic, the tarp from Dave clutched in her hand. The work was slow, clumsy, and terrifying. Every muscle screamed in protest. Her hands, accustomed to the delicate work of sutures and injections, were clumsy with a hammer, raw and blistered within an hour. She was a doctor, not a roofer. But she was also a woman with nothing left to lose and a promise to keep. As the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky, she finally hammered the last nail. A small, ugly, but waterproof patch now covered the roof above exam room 2. Exhausted, she slid down from the roof and made her way back to the rubble of her house. She sat on the one remaining piece of her foundation, the cold stone seeping into her tired bones. She pulled the cracked photo of her and Mark from her pocket. The sheer, overwhelming weight of it all, the storm, the loss, the insurance company, the mayor, the sheriff, her aching body, her profound loneliness crashed down on her. And for the first time since the tornado hit, Dr. Eris Thorne cried. She wept for her husband, for her home, for her town, for the crushing injustice of it all. They were not quiet tears, but ragged, wrenching sobs of pure despair. But as the sun crested the horizon, its light caught the ugly, beautiful patch on the clinic's roof. It was a scar, a testament to her defiance. Her tears slowed. The despair in her chest began to cool, hardening into something else. It was the cold, clean fire of pure resolve. They could send their sheriffs, pass their ordinances, and hide behind their corporate deals. She didn't care anymore. She would rebuild her clinic. One nail, one board, one brick at a time. Alone. The days that followed blurred into a grueling routine of defiance. Aris rose before the sun and worked until long after it set, fueled by a reservoir of stubbornness she didn't know she possessed. Her solitary labor became a silent spectacle for the shell-shocked residents of Havenwood. A montage of her struggle played out in real time. She became a fixture against the backdrop of ruin. There was Aris, her face smudged with dirt, hauling debris away from the clinic in a wheelbarrow, her path a slow, determined line carved through the chaos. There she was, perched precariously on a ladder, painstakingly picking shards of glass from a window frame with a pair of pliers. There she was again, on her hands and knees inside, scrubbing the floor of exam room 2, trying to reclaim a small patch of sterile ground from the filth. Her hands, once soft and nimble, became a roadmap of her effort, crisscrossed with cuts, blisters that broke and bled, and the deep, angry red of new calluses. Her work was a stark, silent rebuke to the official narrative being spun by Mayor Sterling. The local news would show him at press conferences, standing before pristine architectural renderings of the Omni Health Medical Plaza retail concourse. He used words like synergy, revitalization, and public-private partnership. He promised a brighter future, all while the town's only doctor was, at that very moment, trying to fish salvageable tongue depressors from a puddle of muddy water. The juxtaposition was brutal. The mayor in his clean suit selling a sterile fantasy, and Eris in her torn jeans, covered in grime, achieving something tangible and real. The town watched. At first it was with a kind of weary pity, then with a growing sense of awe. They saw Sheriff Brody's truck parked down the street for hours at a time, a silent, impotent watchdog. They heard the whispers of the mayor's deal with the out-of-town corporation. The pressure in the town was building, a simmering pot of resentment waiting to boil over. The first crack in the town's paralysis came on the 4th day. Eris was trying to rehang a heavy interior door, her exhausted body trembling with the effort, when an old pickup truck rumbled to a stop. It was Maria. She didn't say a word. She simply got out, placed a thermos of hot soup and a bottle of clean water on a stable piece of rubble, and gave Eris a small, determined nod. "Luis is feeling much better, doctor," she said softly. "He sits up now. He asked me to thank you." That simple act of kindness, of solidarity, felt more nourishing than the soup itself. It was a signal, it was permission. A few other neighbors, watching from their ruined porches, saw the exchange. They didn't join in, not yet. But the look in their eyes had changed from fear to something closer to shame, and then to consideration. The turning point came that afternoon. Eris's progress on exam room 2 was undeniable. It was beginning to look like a functional space again. This visible defiance was a personal affront to Mayor Sterling's authority. He couldn't stand it. He dispatched Sheriff Brody again, but this time he wasn't there for a quiet warning. This time, Brody carried a clipboard and a hammer. In his other hand was a large, ugly sign, printed in bold red letters. "Cease and desist. By order of the Havenwood Town Council." This time, Brody didn't arrive in an empty street. A small crowd had gathered a silent, watching tribe of a dozen or so residents. Maria was there. Big Dave from the hardware store stood with his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. They watched as the sheriff trudged towards the clinic, where Eris stood in the doorway, her body a physical barrier protecting her work. "Step aside, Eris," Brody said, his voice strained. "I have to post this." Eris didn't move. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke with a clear, cutting calm that was more powerful than any shout. "No." Brody faltered. "I have a direct order." "And I have a moral one," she replied, her gaze sweeping over him to the small crowd. "You can nail that to the door, Brody. You can build a wall around this place if you want. But I am not stopping. There are people in this town who are sick and hurt, and they need a doctor, not another one of the mayor's press conferences. This clinic was here for you, Brody, when your son had that asthma attack 2 years ago. It was here for your wife after she fell and broke her wrist. It was built to serve this community, not to be bulldozed for some soulless corporation from the city. You go back and you tell the mayor he can have this land when every single person in Havenwood is healthy and safe. And until that day comes, get off my property." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Brody stood frozen, the sign dangling from his hand, his face a mixture of shame and fury. He was beaten. In the back of the small crowd, a 17-year-old girl named Jenna quietly lowered her phone. She was a forward on the high school soccer team, and Dr. Thorne had set her fractured arm last season, refusing to charge her family the full amount when she learned Jenna's father had been laid off. Jenna had watched the whole scene unfold through her phone's camera, her own anger building with every word Eris spoke. She had captured the whole thing. Eris's righteous, unshakable stance, the sheriff's humiliated retreat, the defiant hope on the faces of the onlookers. Later that night, sitting on a cot in the noisy, crowded high school gymnasium that served as the town's shelter, Jenna watched the video again. She could feel the injustice burning in her gut. Dr. Thorne was out there fighting for them, and the town's own leaders were trying to tear her down. With trembling fingers, she opened her social media app. She uploaded the video. She didn't know what else to do. She wasn't an activist or an influencer, but she knew a hero when she saw one. She wrote a simple, honest caption beneath the video player. "This is my doctor, Dr. Eris Thorne. A tornado destroyed her home and our town of Havenwood, okay. For 4 days, she's been rebuilding our only clinic by herself, working from sunrise to sunset. Today, our mayor and sheriff tried to legally stop her from helping us. This is what she said. Havenwood needs a hero, and we have one. Please share. Havenwood hero. Let her work. Rebuild Havenwood." She hit post. For the first hour, it was just a few likes from her friends at school. Then, someone from the next town over shared it. Then it was picked up by a local news blogger in Oklahoma City who was monitoring tornado-related hashtags. He wrote a short article around the video. From there, the spark ignited. It was shared by a national weather reporter, then a famous actor known for his humanitarian work. By midnight, Jenna's phone was buzzing nonstop. The digital spark she had released into the world was becoming a wildfire, raging across the country while its subject slept, unaware, in the heart of the storm. Eris knew nothing of the digital tempest swirling around her name. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of exam room 2. Her singular goal for the night was to reclaim this small patch of territory for medicine, to make it an inviolable sanctuary. She worked with a feverish, almost manic energy, a final push against the crushing weight of exhaustion. She scrubbed the floor with a bleach solution until the tile gleamed under the beam of her headlamp. She used a salvaged pane of plexiglass and a tube of sealant from Dave to create a makeshift, airtight window. She meticulously sterilized a tray of basic instruments, forceps, scissors, a suturing chiton, boiling water on a camping stove. She set up a clean cot against the far wall, and with a final burst of energy, wrestled a heavy metal cabinet upright, stocking it with the bandages, antiseptics, and medications she had painstakingly rescued. Around 4 a.m. she was done. The room was an island of order and pristine hope in an ocean of chaos. It smelled of bleach and purpose. She had done it. She had carved out a space where she could heal people. As if on cue, a soft, hesitant knock came from the clinic's back door. It was a young mother from a few blocks over, her face pale with worry, cradling a small child. "Doctor," she whispered, "he's so hot. I don't know what to do." Eris led them into the newly sanctified room. She diagnosed the child's high fever, administered a dose of pediatric acetaminophen, and gave the mother calm, reassuring instructions. In that moment, in the quiet hum of her generator and the soft whimpers of a cooling child, Eris had reopened the Havenwood Community Clinic. It wasn't a grand opening with a ribbon and a speech. It was a quiet, desperate act of service in the dead of night. It was the only victory that mattered. Her duty done, the adrenaline that had sustained her for days finally abandoned her. Her body felt like it was made of lead. She stumbled over to a second cot she had set up for herself, not even bothering to take off her boots. She collapsed onto it, and the world dissolved into a deep, dreamless, and profoundly earned sleep. She was woken hours later, at the edge of dawn, by a sound. It wasn't the wind or the drip of water. It was a low, deep rumble, a vibration she felt in her bones before she heard it with her ears. It was the sound of heavy engines, dozens of them. Her heart seized with dread. Bulldozers. Sterling had made his move. He'd finally sent the machines to finish the job, to erase her work and her clinic from the face of Havenwood. The fight was over. She had lost. She pushed herself up, every muscle protesting. She walked through the darkened clinic, her footsteps echoing in the ruin. She reached the shattered front entrance, squaring her shoulders, ready to make one last, hopeless stand in front of the building she had poured her soul into. She would not let them take it without looking her in the eye. She stepped out into the misty dawn light and froze. The street was not filled with demolition equipment. It was choked with an army of resurrection. As far as she could see, there were pickup trucks, contractor vans with logos from Tulsa, Fort Smith, and Wichita Falls. There were flatbed trucks laden with stacks of fresh lumber and drywall, roofing trucks, cement mixers, and vans belonging to electricians and plumbers. It was a legion of builders. At the front of the impressive, silent crowd, standing right where Sheriff Brody had stood with his cease and desist order, was Big Dave from the hardware store. His face was streaked with tears, but he was grinning. In his hands, he held 2 large, steaming cups of coffee. He simply nodded towards the assembled army of strangers. A big, burly man with a kind face and a beard salted with gray stepped forward. He wore a Carhartt jacket with the logo Jensen Construction stitched over the pocket. His eyes took in the state of the clinic, lingering for a moment on the small, ugly, hand-nailed patch on the roof. He looked at Eris, this one small woman standing alone, covered in dust and defiance. He held up his phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. On it was Jenna's video. It had 3.7 million views. His voice was a low, respectful rumble, but it carried across the silent street like a proclamation. "Dr. Thorne?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "We saw you rebuilt the clinic alone. We figured it was our turn. We're here to rebuild your home." Eris stared at him. She looked at Big Dave, who was now openly weeping. She looked past them, at the sea of faces, men and women of all ages, all looking at her with an expression of profound respect and admiration. She looked at the trucks, a formidable force of hope, loaded with everything she could possibly need. The coffee cup that Big Dave handed her trembled in her grip. The iron wall she had built around her heart, the dam that had held back days of grief, rage, and bone-deep exhaustion, finally crumbled. Her knees felt weak. A sob escaped her, then another. Dr. Eris Thorne, who had faced down a tornado and a corrupt mayor without shedding a tear, stood on the doorstep of her broken clinic and wept. They were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of overwhelming, soul-shaking relief. She was not alone. The community, the real community, had answered her call. In the distance, parked a block away, Mayor Sterling and Sheriff Brody sat in the mayor's black sedan. They watched the scene unfold, their faces masks of disbelief and utter impotence. The small-town doctor they had tried to crush had just summoned an army with an act of will, and they had been rendered completely and totally irrelevant by a tidal wave of human decency. What followed was a miracle of organized chaos. The arrival of the contractors unleashed a storm of positive energy that was the polar opposite of the tornado's destructive fury. The street transformed into a buzzing hive of activity, a symphony of reconstruction set to an uplifting soundtrack of hammers, saws, and the easy laughter of people working towards a common good. It was a montage of rebirth. A team of roofers from Tulsa swarmed the clinic, tearing off the damaged sections with professional efficiency, while another crew laid down new, waterproof sheeting. A framing crew from Arkansas descended on the rubble of Eris's house, and within hours, the skeletal outline of new walls began to rise from the foundation. Electricians ran new wiring, plumbers laid new pipes, and a seemingly endless supply of materials was unloaded from flatbed trucks. In the midst of it all was Eris. Her role had transformed. She was no longer a lone laborer, but the calm, beating heart of the entire operation. After a hot shower in a contractor's RV, and a change into fresh clothes someone had donated, she was back in her element. She set up a makeshift first aid station on a picnic table, treating the minor cuts and scrapes of the volunteer army. She moved through the site with a renewed sense of purpose, directing, advising, and offering thanks, her medical knowledge now applied to keeping this new community healthy as they worked. Big Dave's hardware store became the unofficial command center, his phone ringing off the hook as he coordinated deliveries and volunteers. Jenna, now a local celebrity, managed a social media page, posting updates and fielding calls from news outlets across the country. On the second day of the rebuild, a van with a national news network logo pulled up. A sharp, professional reporter stepped out, her cameraman in tow. They didn't go to the mayor's office, they came straight to the construction site. They interviewed Eris, who, with characteristic humility, deflected all the praise onto the volunteers. "I just patched a roof," she said simply. "These are the people who are rebuilding a town." They interviewed the burly foreman from Jensen Construction, who spoke of seeing the video and knowing instantly that he had to come. They interviewed a triumphant Jenna, who explained with newfound confidence why she felt compelled to post the video. Then, the reporter, a woman who clearly smelled a bigger story, cornered Mayor Sterling as he tried to slip away from his office. Under the glare of the camera lens and a barrage of pointed questions, Sterling's slick composure finally cracked. "Why did the town issue a cease and desist order to a doctor trying to provide medical care after a disaster?" the reporter asked, her microphone inches from his face. Sterling stammered, sweating. "It was a procedural matter. For safety." "But witnesses say you were trying to clear that land for a pre-existing development agreement with OmniHealth. Is that true?" "OmniHealth is a valued partner in the future of Havenwood," he fumbled, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. He had said the name. He had confirmed the rumor. The reporter's eyes lit up. The story had just gone from a local human interest piece to a national story about small-town corruption. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, the state attorney general's office announced an official investigation into the Havenwood Town Council. The story was everywhere. Facing a public relations nightmare of epic proportions, OmniHealth's corporate headquarters issued a terse press release publicly withdrawing their proposal and denying any knowledge of the mayor's tactics. A week later, the Havenwood Town Council, under immense pressure from a newly emboldened citizenry, held an emergency session and voted unanimously to recall Mayor Sterling. Sheriff Brody quietly submitted his letter of resignation the next day. The most satisfying victory, however, was smaller and more personal. A sleek sedan with a corporate logo pulled up to the bustling worksite. A young woman in a sharp suit got out, looking nervous. She introduced herself as a vice president from Sterling Cross Insurance. She found Eris and, with a sincere and deeply apologetic tone, hand-delivered a certified check for the full, replacement value amount of her policy. "Carl has been reassigned to a new department," she said quietly, "one that does not involve customer contact." 3 months later, Havenwood was a town transformed. The scars in the landscape remained, but they were healing. The autumn sun shone brightly on a crowd gathered in the middle of town. It was a double celebration. The first ribbon cutting was for the new and improved Havenwood Community Clinic. It was fully repaired, freshly painted, and stocked with brand new medical equipment, much of it donated by medical supply companies that had followed the story. The second was for Eris's new home, a beautiful, modest house standing on the exact footprint of the old one, fully furnished by the donations that had poured in from every corner of the country. Eris stood at a small podium flanked by Big Dave, a beaming Jenna, and the foreman from Jensen Construction who had driven back for the occasion. She looked out at the sea of familiar faces, her patients, her neighbors, her friends. "They say a tornado can tear a town apart," she began, her voice clear and steady. "But it can also show you what you're made of. It can strip away everything that doesn't matter and show you what's truly essential. This foundation," she said, gesturing first to the clinic, then to her home, "it isn't made of concrete and wood. It's made of resolve. It's made of kindness. It's made of the simple, powerful belief that looking after your neighbor is the only thing that really matters. Thank you. Thank you all for not just rebuilding my home, but for showing me I was never really alone." The applause was thunderous, a joyous, heartfelt sound that echoed through the rebuilt streets. Later that afternoon, the celebrations faded, and the quiet, steady rhythm of life returned. Eris was inside her new, bustling clinic. The waiting room was full. She was in exam room 2, the very room she had fought so hard to save, tending to a little boy who had a scraped knee from falling off his new bicycle. As she placed a colorful bandage on his knee, she looked up and caught the eye of his mother. They shared a smila, simple, grateful, neighborly smile. It was a small moment, utterly ordinary, and it was everything. The camera of the mind pulls back, showing the bright, clean clinic filled with the quiet murmur of a town healing. It moves past the new houses and the newly planted saplings, showing a community not just restored, but reborn stronger, more connected, and built on a foundation that no storm, natural or man-made, could ever shake again.